Hey, what's going on, guys? Room Gaming here, back with another video. In today's episode, we're taking a look at the Hammer of the Ancients Barbarian, and this is going to be more of a starter guide, so not necessarily an in-game guide. So this should hopefully help you get off the ground and running at the start of Season 7. We'll probably release a guide more geared towards the in-game a little bit later as the season progresses, but for now, we're just going to do a starter guide. So let's go ahead and jump into it. Starting out with some of the pros. So this is an above average build. Currently, you can see in the bottom right, we have them listed as tier A to B. And most people have them at high B currently, but I have seen a whole bunch of threads on Reddit talk about how a lot of people think that they are at least A tier. So they're hovering either probably low A or high B at the moment. So they are in a better spot than they were in Season 6. So if we take a quick look here at Maxwell, you can see Hammer of the Ancients Barb is currently sitting at high B tier. So you can kind of see the plus sign of where they were from the previous season, and they did make a bump up from the C tier, and they are at the top of B tier. So they're kind of fringe AB, so they're in a good spot right now. Another thing I really like about Hammer of the Ancients Barb is it's very straightforward. It's very simple to play. It's not super complex. And then this build will also scale pretty well into in-game content as well. A lot of people will be using Hammer of the Ancients Barb to actually push pits. There actually is another variation of this build called the Earthquake Barbarian, which is actually S tier at the moment. So the Hammer of the Ancients Barb is not going to focus quite as much on Earthquake as that build does, but they are very similar. There's not too much difference between the two. So you could take a build like this, and later, once you do want to get into in-game content, you can look up the Earthquake build and kind of follow that guide, and your character will kind of transition from an A to B tier to an S tier build. So some of the cons here, restrictive weapon choices. You pretty much have to use a two-hand bludgeoning weapon, and you also have to use a one-hand mace for the bash. Now for this build specifically, we're taking the two-hand mace expertise talent, which will funnel both into our one-hand weapon, which will be a mace, as well as our two-hand weapon, which will be a mace as well, so that we can kind of double dip from that talent into both of our weapons. So your Hammer of the Ancients will be assigned to that two-hand bludgeoning weapon, and this build will also be using Earthquake some as well, and two-hand weapons have the highest base damage of all the different weapon types, so this is going to make it really good for the Earthquakes that will come out of this build as well. With that being said, though, there is some ramp time with this build. It does take a little bit of time to get those Earthquakes kind of built up under your feet to start doing damage. So in that regard, it doesn't have that sort of snappy playstyle to it that you might see out of something like a Spiritborn, or, you know, something like a Rogue. You're kind of a slow, sluggish tank a little bit. And while you can do a whole bunch of damage in a concentrated area, you're not going to be able to snap around the map, just kind of one-shotting everything. And then this Barb is also pretty Fury hungry. However, one of the things that's really nice about this build is our Bash and our Call of the Ancients will be able to regenerate that pretty quickly for us. Okay, let's talk about Witchcraft Powers now. So Witchcraft Powers are going to be kind of the new thing in Season 7, kind of like what runes were in Season 6, Witchcraft Powers are the new thing in Season 7. So you see we have two different rows here. So the top row is what we're going to recommend to run, and then the bottom row is, you know, some alternatives. You can run this as well. And you can see we have these little arrows here. That just means that there is a synergy between like two different things. So Purging Touch and Witching Hour, and then Wave of Woe and Hex of Shattering, they also pair pretty well together. We'll kind of explain that here in just a minute. But here in the top left, we have Wave of Woe. And Wave of Woe is going to be pretty strong for us because this will do Eldritch damage. And if we take a look at Shaken Soul here, your Eldritch effects apply vulnerable for 3.3 seconds. So Wave of Woe is going to allow us to apply vulnerable. And Wave of Woe can actually be replaced with a couple other Witchcraft Powers once you get to rank 10, because your Psych and Growth and Decay damage will also apply vulnerable as well. So if you do get this to rank 10, just know that you can actually end up replacing Wave of Woe with something else to apply that vulnerable. Now, we have two different unique witch powers. Let's talk about that really quick. So we have Pyronado here, and then we have Vengeful Spirit Servant. So Pyronado is going to require both a Hex and an Aura effect. So the reason you want to run Pyronado with Hex of Shattering is because Wave of Woe will apply this Hex effect through Hex of Shattering. So if we read it out here, your Witchcraft effects from Wave of Woe will inflict Hex of Shattering, causing enemies to deal reduced damage for 5 seconds. So this will allow us to apply the Hex effect essentially through these two Witchcraft powers. So if you are running Paranado, then you will want to run that with Hex of Shattering. And Paranado is going to pull mobs in front of you, basically if they have both a Hex and an Aura effect. So that's really good for Hodabar because you could group mobs right up in front of you. You have kind of a smaller area that you do damage in, kind of right in front of your character. So having a way to be able to kind of group those mobs right in front of your character is very, very important. So this is an option if you do like that play style more. We do have the other Witchcraft power, which we probably recommend more, is Vengeful Spirit Servant. So our overpower damage is actually based on our fortified light and our current life. So we want to be at max health as much as we possibly can. And this is going to allow us to kind of abuse that, stay at max life more for increased overpower damage. Overpower damage is something that's very important in this build. So from a survivability standpoint and from a damage standpoint, it's very important to stay at max life as much as you possibly can. So that's why we're running the Spirit Servant. Now for Purging Touch, we have not talked about Occult Gems yet. That's going to be in the next slide. But the reason you would take Purging Touch is because it synergizes well with this gem essentially. So when you have 3 or more Eldritch Witch powers equipped, every 1 second your next core skill you cast is also treated as Eldritch. So we have 1, 2, and 3 Eldritch different powers here. So now our core skill is treated as an Eldritch spell. So what this means is that Eldritch spell will apply vulnerable here through Shaken Souls. So you could draw a whole bunch of arrows over here and, you know, everything kind of connects in one way or another. Just know that if you are going this setup and you are running Purging Touch, you want to be taking this gem. And then we also have something called Aura Effects. So Aura of Misfortune is going to be really nice. This is going to be categorized as a Psych and an Aura effect. So this is okay at, you know, lower ranks. You get that 10% chance to make enemies basically stumble and do no damage. However, at rank 5 is where this is more important because you get 15% increased movement speed and 30% more damage. And where this gets really, really strong is with something like Aura Specialization. So you deal 35% increased critical strike damage to enemies within your auras. So really what you're looking for is that movement speed, the slow, the stumble, and the critical strike all kind of paired together to make these 2 very, very strong powers that synergize well with one another. And you can see with more ranks, you get increased size. Okay, let's talk about the Occult Gems. So through Hungering Void, this is going to be really nice because this kind of almost replaces the Still Grasp that we used in Season 6 to kind of pull those mobs into us. Whenever we have one of those Aura effects active from the Witch powers in the previous slide, we're now going to be able to essentially pull mobs into us every 8 seconds. And one thing I really like about these gems is they give us armor and resist to all elements. So that's really going to help a lot as we try to get that armor, get to that armor cap, that resist cap that is so difficult to get to in Torment 4. Essentially, these 3 different gems right here are taking out an entire torment of armor and resist cap that you have to get to. So it's really nice to have this. Really glad they added this. I thought it was a little bit too difficult last season to get to those caps. So really nice to see this. We also have Witching Hour, which is really nice. We talked about that in the last slide. This is going to make our next core skill be treated as an Eldritch ability, which of course will be applying that vulnerable for us. And then we're also taking Killing Wind. That's going to give us that 50% critical strike chance and more movement speed. And this is really nice because this is kind of an issue with Barb in general, is they typically have issues moving around and kind of snapping from pack to pack. So any percent movement speed that we can get, it feels really nice. Then in the bottom here, as an alternative choice, you could run something like a Vile Phylactery. And this is going to be more of a defensive option more than anything. You can pair this up with the Poison Frog Serpent. So if you are dying a lot, you can run this to give yourself essentially a barrier that will save your life instead of killing you. And this can only occur once every 75 seconds. So if you're looking for a more defensive option, you could run something like this setup. We also have Wicked Pact and Wave of Woe. So this is actually probably what you'll get very, very early into the season. And you're not going to have these rare and legendary gems yet. So this is a pretty good combination if you do run into that early. And this is essentially just going to beef up your Eldritch powers even more. So pretty strong to take Wicked Pact. Okay, let's talk about the skills that you're going to be running. So Hammer of the Ancients, Rallying Cry, Bash, Leap, Ground Stomp, and Iron Maelstrom. Obviously, a lot of this stuff can be replaced as you get more gear, especially once you get the aspect that reduces the CDR on your Rallying Cry and your shouts in general. You can replace some of this. You could replace Ground Stomp with another shout. You could also replace Iron Maelstrom with Call of the Ancients, especially if you are running into Fury issues. But for the most part, as more of a starter build, this is probably what I'd run, because you're not going to have access to all those different aspects, at the start of the season. So Hammer of the Ancients, this is going to be the core skill in this. This is going to have a pretty small area of effect until you get the Ancestral Force aspect. And typically you'd be casting the spell when you're at full fury. It will do more damage that way, especially if you're taking Furious Hammer of the Ancients. The next skill you probably want to take is Rallying Cry. This is going to fix a lot of that fury regeneration issue you're going to have, especially early on. So this is going to give us movement speed, which is really nice, and then that 40% resource regeneration. And once you can get more CDR on your shouts, this becomes even stronger. So it's probably not going to feel super great early, but it is still worth taking. But ultimately, you want the aspect that will get you more CDR on your shouts. It'll make this feel really, really strong. And then early in the season, you're going to be taking Ground Stomp as well, because this is going to allow us to apply Vulnerable. Now, you can also, of course, apply Vulnerable through the Witch Powers from above, but if you don't have that yet, Ground Stomp is an option. And then one of the main issues that Barb has is mobility, so we'll be taking Leap to kind of traverse around the map a little bit better. We'll also be taking Bash, so this is going to be your main Fury generation, and you typically want to be alternating back and forth between Hammer of the Ancients and Bash. So what I like to do is Bash to full Fury, and then Hammer of the Ancients, and then just kind of go back and forth between the two. And then your ultimate will be Iron Maelstrom, and this will have a different effect for each type of weapon that you have equipped. But essentially, this is going to be the button that you press to take out an entire screen of mobs. So this is a good ultimate to pick up early in the season. Okay, now let's quickly take a look at the skill trees. So I'm going to have a link for this in the description of the video. You can just click it and pull up the same tree that I have here. So of course, we'll be taking Bash. It's going to be our main source of Fury regeneration. And then we'll be taking Enhanced Bash. That's going to give us maximum life as Fortify, which is going to in turn increase our overpower damage. And then Battle Bash, so clobbering an enemy generates an additional 10 Fury. We'll be putting 5 points into Hammer of the Ancients. We'll be taking Enhanced Hammer of the Ancients and Violent Hammer of the Ancients. Again, this build will focus a lot on overpower damage, so this is going to be a really good node to get. And then 3 points into Warpath. Again, funneling more damage into overpower. We also have 5 points into Ground Stomp, Enhanced Ground Stomp, and Tactical Ground Stomp. So this will do quite a bit of single target damage for you, so it's going to be really nice for a defensive and an offensive option. You can also take something like Iron Skin as well. That's going to give you that big barrier absorb shield. So you can kind of go back and forth between the two, whatever feels better. Then towards the middle of the tree, we'll be taking Leap. We'll be going into Enhanced Leap and then Power Leap. So Power Leap is going to turn this into a Fury regeneration spell for us. So each time we leap, we're going to be able to top off our Fury bar, which will be really nice. And then Enhanced Leap is going to give us a little bit more CDR on our leap, if we don't hit any enemies with it. And then we'll also be getting 3 points into Battle Fervor here. So 1 point into Aggressive Resistance and then 4 into Battle Fervor. And this is going to essentially give us a way to proc Berserking. So the idea is to leap into a pack and then proc Battle Fervor, and that will give us a Berserking proc. And that, if you don't know what Berserking is, gives you 25% increased damage, I believe, and 30% increased movement speed. So this is a very core part of Barbarian. It's something that we pretty much always want to keep up. So you'll see, especially like in a Glyph board or a Paragon board, you'll see a whole bunch of nodes that really buff Berserking damage. So just kind of think of it as vulnerable, but for Barbarian. Now you kind of have an option here. You can take something like Mighty Throw if you want. That's going to give you more damage. However, if you are having Fury regeneration problems, you can take Rallying Cry as well. Probably most builds early are going to be taking Rallying Cry over something like Mighty Throw, but once you do sort of get the Fury regeneration issues figured out, you will be able to go into something like Mighty Throw for more damage. So once you do get to Mighty Throw, you'll be taking Warrior's Mighty Throw. That's just essentially going to do more damage, and you'll also get 25% increased attack speed through Enhanced Mighty Throw while the weapon is out on the ground. And then if you end up taking Rallying Cry, go to Strategic Rallying Cry. Tactical Rallying Cry is pretty good. However, a lot of times you will overcap on Fury, so I like to take Strategic Rallying Cry and Enhanced Rallying Cry. Then for our ultimate, we'll be taking the Iron Maelstrom. We'll be going all the way down to Supreme Iron Maelstrom and Prime Iron Maelstrom. And the Supreme node here is going to reduce Iron Maelstrom's cooldown by 1 second each time you swap weapons. So if you put Bash on your one-hand weapon, then on your two-hand weapon, you put Hammer of the Ancients. As you swap between those two weapons, you're getting more and more CDR in your ultimate, which will essentially give you more options to press it. So if you stack this with a whole bunch of CDR and you're constantly swapping weapons, this actually has a fairly low cooldown, and you should have this up for probably every other pack. And then we're also going to be taking Walking Arsenals. So whenever you use a bludgeoning, a two-hand slashing, or a dual wield, they each will give 15% increased damage. If all three of those bonuses are active, you're going to get more crowd control duration and attack speed, which is very nice. So you will be able to proc this again through your Iron Maelstrom, because this will do an attack with each one of your weapons. Okay, let's talk a little bit about aspects here. So what aspects do you want to be going for? So we have these little aspects here with like a red glare. The ones with the red glare are going to be more core to the build than these other ones. Obviously, you want all of them if you can, but the ones to focus on first are probably going to be these three with the red glow here. And a couple other easy ones to get are going to be these two as well, because you can just run a dungeon. These are all unlocked by running dungeons. So just do that dungeon, unlock these. But most of the power in this build is going to come from these with the red icon on it. So we're not going to cover absolutely everything here. But if we take a look at the gamble and drop aspects, you can see that we're going for aspects here that proc an earthquake, or that buff earthquake. We haven't talked about how to proc that yet. So the way you proc earthquake is going to be through a rune called Tech. And we'll get to that a little bit later on in the guide once we get to the rune page. But just know that's why we're taking all these different earthquake aspects, is because we do actually proc that through our runes. And that's where a significant portion of your damage will come from, because those earthquakes build under that Hammer of the Ancient damage area, and they stack for a whole bunch of damage. Now, we can also proc that as well through aspect of earthquakes through our ground stomp that we talked about earlier. That's another reason you're going to be taking ground stomp, is because it will proc the earthquake under our feet. And then not only this, just by having this aspect, our earthquakes will do 20 to 60% increased damage as well. You can also spawn an earthquake through your overpowers as well. And once you sort of get that gameplay loop of overpowers, Hammer of the Ancients, earthquakes kind of all stacking on top of each other, you're berserking as well, that's when the build kind of comes online. Okay, so good uniques for this build is going to be Ring of Red Fury. So we can get some max resource, attack speed, critical strike, fire resist. This is all pretty good. The critical strike is really nice, but really the main reason we take this is for the effect down here. So since this is such a fury hungry build, after every 100 fury that we spend, our next Hammer of the Ancients within 5 seconds is guaranteed critical strike and deals 50 to 80% bonus critical strike damage. So that's really nice, because that will scale pretty well with the Banished Lord's Talisman. So we get more resist all, which is very nice. Here's some max life, overpower damage, attack speed, 1 to 2 to core skills. So this is probably even more important than this ring over here, because it checks pretty much every single box of what this build needs. And it also synergizes really well with overpower. So after we spend 275 of our primary resources, our next core skill is a guaranteed overpower, and that overpower will do 20 to 60% increased damage. So you get a ton of damage out of this unique. And then finally, Yin's Blessing is pretty good as well, mainly just for the resist all. The resource generation is pretty nice with the move speed. And then the proc is pretty nice as well. Casting a skill has a 40 to 60% chance to trigger a non-mobility or non-ultimate skill that is currently on cooldown. So you can get like extra cast of your shouts, essentially. So extra ground stomps, things like that. And of course, you can farm these bosses to get these uniques. However, the best way to get this is to gamble with obols. You should have absolutely no problem getting any of these uniques. They're all pretty easy to get. So just quite simply run pits, get murmuring obols, and then spend them in town and try to gamble and get these. Now, in terms of the runes, these are probably going to be the best runes, Tech and Bach. So Tech is what we were talking about earlier. This is how you're going to proc your earthquake every 50 offering. And then through the Bach rune, every 5 meters that you travel, you will get 50 offering. So these two in combination are going to give you a whole bunch of earthquake procs. And then Tom and Gar are pretty good as well, because this is going to give you that stacking critical strike chance. And since we're pressing Hammer of the Ancients over and over and over again, it's very easy to get that offering through Tom. And basically, we're just getting a flat 25% increased critical strike chance. So this is one of the reasons that this build does have some ramp up time, because it takes time to build up that critical strike chance. It takes time to get berserking effects. It takes time to get all those earthquakes stacked to do that high damage. So for the glyphs, we'll get into the Paragon board here in just a second. But for the glyphs, this is what you're going to be running: Wrath, Dominate, Crusher, Territorial, and Ire. And for the most part, we're running these because these buff our overpower damage and our critical strike damage as well. And Wrath is really going to help us regenerate a whole bunch of fury, because we're stacking so much critical strike. Each time that we do critical strike, we get 3 additional fury. These 2 nodes are going to be really nice for the increased overpower damage. Territorial is really nice because typically we're grouping those mobs up in front of us, so we're getting a whole bunch of close targets. And then those close targets will also get some damage reduction for them as well. And then Ire is going to be really good for that berserking effect. And really, if you look at these bonuses, they check all the boxes. So if you look at the legendary bonus for all these: critical strike damage, overpower damage, vulnerable damage, increased damage to close enemies, and then just a flat increased damage. So really, the main reason we take these glyphs is due to all that multiplicative damage that we're getting out of these combined. So here is our board, and this is just the base board that we're looking at. So this is not like filled out in any way. This is the least amount of points that I could possibly spend to link everything up to a legendary node and to link everything up to a glyph. So you'll notice here in all these different little blue spots, that's probably the next thing I would focus on, is coming into this board. If you do copy it and filling out the blue spots, I highly recommend for any sort of build that you do to fill out a Paragon Board calculator, because this is going to show you those spots that you might be missing. Because in the in-game client, you don't have these little blue tiles, and you can miss some of these by accident if you're not paying attention. But to just quickly go over the board, this is the starter board. We'll be putting territorial in this socket. Moving up, we're taking the Blood Rage board, so rotate it so that the legendary node is kind of in the bottom right here. And then we'll be taking the Ire glyph. Directly above this, you can rotate the board to where the legendary node is in the top left. So I guess I didn't completely finish this board, but you will want to take Bonebreaker as well. And then the glyph itself is going to be in the bottom right, so rotate it to where the glyph's in the bottom right. Then if we go to the left-hand side here, we're running the Decimator. And then to pair that up, we'll be running the Dominant glyph. And then we have one more board here on the left. So this is going to be the Carnage board, and this is going to be the Crusher glyph. So again, if you are to take this board, what I'd highly recommend to do is fill out the blue nodes. There's a lot of good magic nodes and rare nodes that you can take. So this would be a very good one. Demolish. There's no reason not to put some points into that. You could probably go up here to the top left and snag some of that berserking damage, get some more critical strike chance. And then another node that's kind of confusing here is this Blood Rage legendary node. So why are we taking this? So the first part of this talks about bleed damage. That doesn't matter to us at all. The part that we're more worried about is the berserking damage bonus. So it's not an oversight. It's still a really good node, even though it has that bleed damage in there. And I believe the Iron Maiden ultimate will also proc that bleed damage. So you will get some benefit from it for a while until you do, of course, eventually replace Iron Maiden. But yeah, for the most part, if you were to take this board, go ahead and snag some of those rare nodes, get the legendary Bonebreaker node, and then I would go in here and just start filling out the rest of these blue nodes here. Okay, guys, that's going to be the end of this video. I'll put some links in the description of the video so you can check out the talent, so you can check out this board as well. Again, left some flexibility in the board so you can kind of build it out how you want, where you see best fit. But we did get sort of the foundation of the board built. So let me know if you guys have any questions or anything like that. If you guys enjoyed the video, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. We'll see you on the next one.